Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our first ever virtual RTPI Regional Awards for Planning Excellence, Top of the Pops, Planning Pops, I should say, Top of the Planning Pops event. So before we start the session, I'd like to let all delegates know that you will be automatically muted as you arrive in the webinar, so please don't turn your microphones on. If you have a question, then please submit it in the chat section on the right-hand side of your screen at any time throughout the session, and we will do our best to ask as many questions as possible during the Q&A section of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and it will be sent to you with a copy of it will be sent to you after the session. These awards have now been running for over 40 years and provide that all-important opportunity to celebrate the achievements of planning professionals, their teams and organisations as they work to transform our places and spaces, support our communities, protect and enhance our environment and help shape successful and resilient economies for future generations. And my goodness, what an amazing set of entries we had this year. And I know from speaking to many of the judges what an incredibly difficult task they all had in identifying the winners. And my thanks go to all the judges who gave up their time to undertake this task. The winners that they selected are amongst the most inspiring that I've seen to date. And I've been in planning for as long as these awards have been running. So today's session is a chance to hear more from some of the judges. And we're joined on this webinar by Stephanie Eastwood, who is head judge for RTPI West Midlands Awards for Planning Excellence, by Tim Crawshaw, who is the judge for the North East Awards for Planning Excellence, by Sue Percy, who's the judge for the South East Awards for Planning Excellence, and by Alyn Nichols, who's the judge for the RTPI Yorkshire Awards for Planning Excellence. So before we start, a little bit about each of the judges. And I'm going to start with Stephanie. Stephanie is a chartered town planner with over 6 years' experience in private practice in the West Midlands. She's currently an associate director at Avison Young's Birmingham office and works on a wide range of projects for clients in the public and private sectors and has significant experience in the preparation and management of major planning applications and the promotion of large strategic sites through emerging local plans and neighbourhood development plans. I've known Stephanie for quite a while, and she was the chair of Young Planners West Midlands Committee in 2019 and has been a member of the committee since 2012. She's also chair of the RTPI West Midlands Annual Summer Ball Organising Committee and led the organisation of the event since 2017. As vice chair for the West Midlands region, Stephanie headed the judging panel for this year's awards. Now, Stephanie has also herself been a winner of the regional awards. She won the West Midlands RTPI Young Planner of the Year in 2015. Moving on to Alyn Nichols. Alyn is a member of the RTPI and has been working as a planning consultant for over 35 years. Before setting up his own practice in 1990, he was a full equity partner at a national planning consultancy, dealing with a wide range of development proposals, including mineral extraction, housing, commercial and industrial development, retail and leisure uses. He was also responsible for setting up a Leeds office for the practice. Throughout his career, Alyn has worked on with a diverse range of clients, many of which are household names. He provides strategic, pragmatic advice based on a thorough understanding of issues. He has extensive experience of presenting expert evidence at public inquiries, planning appeal hearings and public examinations. He has also appeared at the Lands Tribunal and as an expert witness in the courts. And recently he was appointed as an expert by the High Streets Task Force. And moving on to Tim Crawshaw. Tim is an international planning and development consultant in the areas of urban design, planning, green infrastructure, energy efficiency and sustainable transport. With experience of Eastern Europe, Africa and the Middle East alongside an expanding UK practice, he has a specific interest in the role of nature-based approaches to addressing the climate emergency, alongside improving health and well-being outcomes and tackling inequality. Tim is an experienced lecturer, trainer and facilitator with a passion for community development, and he continues to champion the role of planning as a key part of the solution to the challenges of our times. Tim is currently the chair of the Tees Valley Nature Partnership and vice chair of the Historic Towns and Villages Forum. And finally, Tim will take on the role of RTPI Vice President in 2021, becoming President in 2022. So we'll be seeing a lot more of Tim. And finally then, Sue Percy, CBE. Sue Percy is the Chief Executive of the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation. Sue is a member of the UK Government's Department of Transport's Highways Efficiency Maintenance Programme Strategic Steering Group, that's a mouthful, sits on the Highways England Supplier Diversity Forum Steering Group and is a member of the London South Bank University Court. She is a former chair of University College London's Transport Institute and holds several voluntary and non-executive director roles. Sue has worked in the built environment sector for over 30 years in allied professions, higher education, and in local government. Sue was awarded a CBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours in June 2019 for services to transport. So what an amazing panel of judges we have, what incredible range of experience that we're actually going to be able to bring together today. So without much further ado, let's hear from the judges themselves. Now, I have a number of questions that I would like to pose to the judges. And don't worry, judges, I won't be asking all of you to answer all of them, as I'd like to leave some time for some of the questions that will come or may come from our audience. So, my first question goes to Alyn and Sue. What are the judges looking for in entries?
Well, shall I go first?
Alyn.
Insofar as Yorkshire is concerned and our judging panel, the clues in the title of the awards, first of all, we're looking for planning, and we're looking for planning inputs into projects and schemes, and how the criteria that we're judging are taken into account in the entry. And then we're looking for excellence. So it's those two aspects, bringing them together, it is what we look for. And we do tend to stick quite rigorously to the criteria.
Thank you, Alyn. And to Sue.
Yeah, well, just really following on from what Alyn has said. I mean, in the South East, we look for good quality submissions. That's primarily what we're looking for. We're looking also, when we're doing the judging, about clarity of information and the issues that are being discussed. And we're also looking for the submissions to address the award criteria and be clear on the category in which they are submitting. And I think for me as well, these are planning awards, they're not architectural awards or any other awards. And sometimes we do get submissions where actually if we were judging on behalf of REBA, then they would do really well. So it's again just making sure that you understand these are planning awards. And I think one other thing will be around provide evidence, not just opinion, because sometimes there's some really great claims, but actually it's difficult to judge whether those claims have been met. So provide some evidence in there as well.
That's really, really helpful. So really, I think that what the two of you have said is, the quality, it's evidence-based, which planners we're all really, really good at, and about just answering the question, in a sense, being very clear about the award criteria. So that's really helpful. And if I can perhaps turn to Stephanie first and then Tim with the second question that I'd like to pose to you. This is quite a challenging one. How has COVID affected the awards, both in terms of the experience that you've had, in terms of judging the entries, and in terms of the entries themselves? So if I can perhaps start with Stephanie.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. So it's my first year leading the judging in the West Midlands this year, so I don't have much to compare it to, but we've obviously had to adapt the way that we've judged the awards this year. And we've been reliant very much on kind of being able to get together in a kind of virtual room like this as a judging panel to discuss submissions. I think there have been benefits to that. Not only has it helped in terms of reducing the amount of travel time we've had to kind of commit to judging panels and giving us more time to perhaps focus on reviewing submissions and discussing them between ourselves. But it's also been, I think, a good thing in terms of helping us with the kind of ambitions around reducing carbon emissions and the kind of direction of travel around climate change in the RTPI. So there's some positives, but I think certainly from speaking to other judges, whilst there are benefits to judging virtually, I think we all would prefer to have the kind of awards announced and perhaps have the opportunity to celebrate them in person. So hopefully we'll be perhaps back to that in the next year or so. In terms of number of submissions, we've done quite well again this year, so we're really pleased with the number of submissions we got, and hopefully we'll be able to continue that next year, really.
That's brilliant, and fingers crossed that we actually do return to something where we can all meet in person and celebrate. And Tim, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got a few reflections really. Firstly, the judging process in terms of actually going out on site was very different, because part of it felt like, you know, you were out and it was like, oh, I'm in a car, you know, I'd left the house, you know, and that was quite interesting. But actually the social aspect of it, I've always really enjoyed being a judge, is actually meeting the people that you meet on site, and sometimes that's a community group that's alongside the professional planners, and I think that aspect wasn't there, which basically means you're relying a lot more on the actual submission that you've got. You know, it's actually, on one level it's really good, because it does make you focus on the actual thing that somebody's put down in their entry. So I think that was another thing. And I think the other reflection I'd have is that the quality of what we got was really, really good. It was actually quite hard to judge though, but people have had more time to spend on putting it in, I think, or at least there's been more focus. So we had this really quite fine line conversations, which, to be fair, when you do it virtually, I think we're a bit more frank as well. I think somehow this bit of distance just means that they speak their mind, you know. And we had we did have the odd little phrase that came out, you know, look, it's not an architectural competition, you know, this sort of stuff. You know, these kind of really quite frank exchanges of views, which were brilliant. And I suppose the one that I won't forget really was that actually one of our entries, which is actually one of our joint winners this year, was in the process of being actually repurposed as a Nightingale hospital as we actually visited. So in my sort of quick chuffy past, you know, and got seen off by the security guards because they were going, oh no, you can't come in here, because it was like they were actually converting the building at the time. And I won't forget that, because that's the sign of the times, isn't it? You know, that was really cool. So yeah.
That's really interesting insight, and I think very much as Stephanie said, you know, there's some positives, and as you, Tim, there's positives, but there are also some negatives. But it's how you actually turn the negatives into something that works. So thank you very much for that. Right, well, I'm going to put the next one to Alyn and Sue. Your top tips for future entrants, and if I can start this time with Sue and then go to Alyn.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, top tips. That's an interesting one, isn't it? But for me, I suppose, and the judging that we do in the South East, it's really about tell the story through your submission. What, you know, be very clear about what the message is that you're trying to convey to the judges. And don't try and tell us absolutely everything about every aspect of the project or the scheme. Really think about what it is that you're trying to get to, the key points. Also draw out what the impact is. If there is an impact, what the innovation is. And also, you know, your style and your tone is really important when you're writing, you know, submissions for awards as well. So really think about that. It's not about cutting and pasting from the report or whatever. It's really about being able to tell the story to a group of people who don't know anything about a particular project or a scheme. I think the other thing is don't bring things forward too early, because you know the judges are looking for things that have some maturity normally, so they can see where they've had impact. And be clear on the issues that you're really focusing on. And also be honest about the things that didn't go so well, because as planners we know that you know it's not a pure science, and we're working with people with schemes and everything else, and things do go wrong. Make sure that you bring those challenges out, because they are often where the real learning happens. So those are probably the main tips from me.
That's a really useful checklist, Sue. Alyn, have you anything to add to the checklist?
Well, I think it's talking about what Sue and what Tim have already said, is that we're judging entries against the criteria we've got, and therefore it's really important that entries focus on those criteria. And then there's nothing more frustrating to find that you've got an entry and you know it's good, but the way that it's presented is as if it was being put forward for an architectural award, and it's then quite difficult to properly assess that. You feel as if you haven't got the information. So that's going back to what I was saying earlier. It's really focusing on the planning content and how it's done. And I mean, Sue mentioned the point that we're quite keen on when we're judging. We like to see the planning problems and how the challenges which are presented in a scheme have been addressed. And because then you can see where planning has influenced the outcome to the development. And we think that's really important when we're judging entries.
That's really helpful. So I'm just sort of capturing that. It is all about, and I've written my own checklist here, so if I have to do one, I can make sure I tick the right boxes. It's been very, very clear about the message. And as you mentioned, Alyn, the challenges, they've actually been overcome and you've taken them on. And it's about outcomes as well, isn't it? And I think that's the point Sue was making. It's that journey between where you wanted to be and the outcome at the end. And it may not have been in the way you imagined, but you know, it may have twisted and turned and brought in other things, but it's all about that sort of impact. And I think, Sue, you also mentioned the word innovation. And the one I really like, and I've that you put in that tick box list, is about don't cut and paste. And I know when I've done judging, so often I've read something, I thought this has been cut and paste from something else. It's not actually answering the question that we as judges need to see. So really helpful, and I hope those will help others when they're thinking about, and I'm sure they will be already, their entries for next year. So right, my next question then. Now this one, and Sue, it's back to you again, but it's also with Tim this time as well. And this one is really, what made your winners stand out? What was special about them? So if I can perhaps start with Tim and then go to Sue on that. So what made your winners stand out?
Yeah, the things that stood out. So I think innovation is definitely in there. I think the leadership role of planning as well was really important as well. And certainly in one of our joint winners was the fact that actually it was a very strong local authority framework that was a starting point for all this. And I think that's a really good, strong message, because we need a really strong public sector that actually sets the scene and gives us the fertile ground to actually do what, now I work on the other side, it gives us the actual certainty and the fertile ground for economic development to happen and for great plans to happen and everything else. I think that was really good. I think the leadership roles was there, definitely. Problem solving, having to be a dynamic, getting something done, well and in a timely fashion, and putting those two things together is actually quite difficult. And I think that certainly, one of our joint winners was very much about that, was actually, look, we thought we've got a situation here, we've got a different situation, and being really responsive to that, I think was awesome. And I think then there's the other stuff which I really like to see, is where planning's in the middle of things. As a planner, you're a convener, you're probably in the middle of everything. You've probably got these spinning plates everywhere, and actually to land this thing actually requires a planner, even though you might end up with other awards. We'll celebrate what it looks like. It's the stuff under the hood, as I say, is the stuff that planners are doing. And when that comes through, that came through. And I suppose really just overcoming barriers, the sort of things we look at it and you'd like quick draw a breath through your teeth and go, that's going to be difficult, and actually it gets sorted. And I think that is, and again, one of our joint winners, particularly the biz in Hartlepool, was, taking a listed building and putting a very, very bold intervention into that will have required a lot of negotiations, I think, and a really great outcome. So yeah, that's the sort of thing.
Oh, fantastic. And Sue, what made your winners stand out?
Well, I mean, many of the things that Tim has spoken about already, but for me, it's really about the three Qs. The three Qs for me are quality of the submission, quality of the project or the scheme, and quality of the professional skills. Those are the three things that we look for. And it's also the question for me is, well, is this good planning, or is this elevated above that? Is there something in there that makes it tips into something where you think it's a little bit more exceptional than good planning? Because that's what we should be doing day in, day out. So what sort of tips it into that the exceptional? And I always know, and it goes back to, you know, when I read it, you know, does it make me smile? Does it make me engage with it? Does it make me excited? And some of those things are a bit intangible. I appreciate that. But what is its uniqueness? What really makes it sing? And certainly in our overall winner this year, all of those things, those tick boxes were completely filled. And so it's really about those extra bits over and above good quality planning.
That is fantastic from both of you. So my sort of checklist I've got here: innovation, leadership, problem solving, delivered, you know, effectively, timing, quality, submission, project, professional skills. But what I loved, Sue, was your comment about what makes it sing. You know, what's that really special thing that it's actually delivering that makes you smile, as you say? And there are some things when you read them and you're just thinking, yes, this is brilliant. And it's that je ne sais quoi, that little added extra. So again, I hope that will help people sort of going forward. Right, now it's my time to bring in Stephanie. Stephanie, as former Young Planner of the Year in the West Midlands, what makes Young Planner of the Year?
Thanks, Sue. Well, I think obviously, in addition to kind of showing us that your experience and your achievements and understanding of the planning process, for me, showing that you are kind of the young planner of the year, it really needs to show your kind of drive beyond just your day job. So it's echoing some of those points that Sue made just a minute ago, and show that you are an ambassador for planning and someone who can be a real model for those who are just starting out in their career in planning, and to younger people as well who might be aspiring to or interested in a career in planning. So that's one aspect to it. But then just thinking about kind of a tip or suggestion for being planners going forwards. One thing that I found really useful from some of our submissions was understanding kind of about a particular achievement in their career that they were kind of most proud of, whether it's a project or a paper they've written or something they've done outside of work on a voluntary basis as part of their own professional development or supporting the development of other young planners, because that really gives you an insight into what's important to that young planner and kind of what makes them stand out from the other candidates and kind of be worthy of the award. And I think it's similar again to some of the points that Sue made before, but as a judge, we want to be inspired by the young planners' attitude, approach and achievements in their career so far, but also be really excited to see kind of what comes next. So I think that's probably what I would say.
That is really, really helpful. And I think you're absolutely right. It's about what makes them special, isn't it? What makes them stand out? What makes them that role model that the young planners are all looking for in that person who's selected? And I think, you know, that inspirational part, that exciting part, that's really, really well made points. And they are greatly unearthed, as you know yourself, Steph, when you've gone out there. People do look to you as Young Planner of the Year. It's that ability to just inspire others at a young age and show that leadership, which is fantastic. So my final question, and I will say already we've got 3 questions coming in from the audience. So audience, keep them coming because we're on to my last question now. And this last question goes to Alyn, Tim and Stephanie. So what did you get out of the judging experience? And have you learned anything that you might now apply to your own work? So if I can perhaps start with Alyn, then go to Tim and then to Stephanie.
It just opens your eyes to what's going on and what is really good. I mean, we're lucky in Yorkshire in that all the entries we had were really, really good. And obviously the winners were excellent. But what I take out of it is is just to understand what good work is going on outside of the sphere of work that I normally get into. And I think sometimes in your career, you get quite blinkered and you think what you're doing is the most important area of planning because you're doing it. And what the awards do, just give you a different perspective. You get more appreciative of what's going on. And quite frankly, it makes you feel better about the planning profession and what we're doing.
And if I can go next to Tim.
Yeah, completely agree with Alyn there. I mean, the whole thing about us feeling good about what it is we do, I think, is actually so important, because, you know, there's many different voices out there. Not all of them are very supportive of our professional work, to be fair. So it's really good to go out there and say, look, you know, we're in here, we're doing it. This is making the world a better place. And I think if we can keep that in mind, I think that's brilliant. And certainly, I think it does take you into to see projects and sectors that you just wouldn't be exposed to ordinarily. Stops me getting typecast, you know, like, oh, look, Tim does that, you know, and that sort of thing. So I think it's really good. And I suppose the takeaway for me is it's actually made me more curious about actually doing work in different sectors as well, because I do tend to work in certain areas, and I think there's just, when you see the breadth and depth of what can be achieved in projects I wouldn't normally get involved in, I'm thinking, all right, okay, I'll be a bit more kind of spread my wings a bit into different areas. So it's been really good, and you know, and obviously it's just really nice seeing good stuff, you know.
And finally, last word to Stephanie.
Thanks. I would agree with Alyn and Tim on what they said, but I think for me as well, having the opportunity to talk about examples of great planning with practitioners who are working in different fields was really interesting, to get different perspectives on what different planners actually consider to be planning excellence. And that probably just gave me a slightly different perspective on the submissions, which I wouldn't have had if I'd just been looking at them in isolation. And I've also, there was a few examples of kind of best practice and ideas that were taken away from it. And one of them that was a kind of theme across a few of our submissions was around kind of the importance of user-led design and the importance of designing spaces to be inclusive and reflect the different needs of users. And that's something that as a region we're going to try and take away and do some CPD on next year, so that we can kind of share some of the kind of good practice which has emerged from some of the award winners.
That is fantastic. And I think the one thing that actually to me comes through from all of you is just how inspired and excited you are when you're talking about them. It's that real enjoyment from having done it. And I think you're absolutely spot on. It's enjoyment from seeing what really is the best of our profession. And it just motivates you because it inspires you. And it's great that the West Midlands have been so inspired that actually it's going to go forward into CPD next year to share that. So I think that the learning that comes from it and that just passion for planning comes through. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to have a look at these questions from others. So bear with me while I just make them a little larger on my screen. And they've disappeared altogether. So I'm going to try again. Right. You have to bear with me as I appear to stare into the camera as I try and read it. Right, the first one, how can young planners demonstrate leadership and other skills when they may not be in a leadership position in their day job today? And I guess, Steph, that starts with you, but then if there's anyone who wants to sort of chip in, then please feel free to do so.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's lots of different ways you can demonstrate leadership, whether that's kind of working with and mentoring even more junior colleagues, or if you've got work experience students who are coming in, you can kind of talk about those kind of things and the way that you've worked with them. But similarly, I know some of the good examples that we've had, and even the submissions that we've had this year, talked about what they're doing outside of work. So for example, if they're involved in taking on a particular role on a committee or a subgroup, whether that's within the organisation that they work in, or whether it's representing the RTPI or other kind of networks and institutes. So they're really good ways of demonstrating that you're kind of stepping out into that leadership and trying to kind of be an ambassador and role model for others.
Thank you. And one thing I'd just say is the Young Planners Conference, which was last week, the first session of the plenary, which I chaired, was actually all about leadership as young planners, and absolutely inspiring young planners, talking about how they demonstrated leadership as young planners, and it just shows that it can be done. So if anyone wants to look at that, that's on YouTube and well worth a view. Has anyone else got anything that they'd like to add to that?
I was just going to add, because leadership comes in many forms actually, and I think people just assume leadership is when you have a particular role and that you demonstrate it through that. Really, that's one aspect of it. But leadership can be demonstrated in so many different ways. It's about being able to have a vision or have an idea and take people along with you, whether that's in work, whether you're volunteering. It's about sort of putting forward something beyond what you would be expected in your day job as well. And certainly our young planner who won this year did things off of his own bat and got things published and so forth. So I think leadership, you can demonstrate it in so many different ways. So it doesn't have to be linked to your day job in any way at all. And it's just taking your opportunities and putting yourself forward and sharing what's inspiring you and how you're trying to make a difference.
Yeah. Tim, I don't know, were you wanting to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's around. I mean, for me, it's around sort of core behaviours really. Leadership comes out of the stuff you do, and you'll be sort of recognised by the way you go about it. And I think that doesn't require a management role. What I've used to say when I've worked in lots of different organisations, leadership is that ability for somebody to say, yes, we're going to go up that mountain. It's for the managers to work out whether you've got enough supplies, you know. So actually leadership is very much around that inspiration and actually doing stuff, not because it's easy, because you're doing it because it's like, it's actually difficult, you know, sometimes. And I think it's a bit of those core behaviours. And it's been, you know, I'd say it sounds daft, isn't it? But it's been a bit cheeky about it, being fearless and actually saying, well, actually, you don't have to do it this way, you know. there is another way, you know. So that's all, you know, that's all I'd say. If I can remember that far anyway.
And Alyn, did anything come from your side on that?
Well, I need to make the point that whilst Yorkshire had the highest number of entries of any region, we are always low on entries for young planner. So if the message I want to get over is, you know, I want people young people in Yorkshire to actually enter to do it. And when we've done it before, I mean, just to reiterate, I mean, I look at whether people are prepared to take the initiative. People will have a job to do. If they're not in a position of authority or management or whatever, but if they're prepared to take the initiative, and it's very much like what Tim said, you know, to be a leader, you don't have to be in charge. You know, it's a matter of saying, well, let's do it, you know, and carrying people with you.
Thank you. And if any young planners are listening and you happen to live in Yorkshire, please be inspired to enter next year, and indeed in any region. Right, so the next question we've got, do you find all the judges agree, or did they have quite different opinions? So Tim, I see you laughing, so I'm going to start with you, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're very lucky actually with our I guess judging panel, that people come from a variety of different backgrounds, and I think that's really good, because I think there was, you know, there's been some discussions where clearly, you know, I always felt nobody was going to agree really. You know, there was quite a lot going on. I think it's because they were quite finely balanced this year, and I suppose the debate is actually that's how you get to it. You've got to have those difficult conversations to actually get back to that place where you actually say, look, this is the criteria measuring it against, because, you know, lots of people have an eye for something, but the eye isn't necessarily the thing. You know, we're looking back into it, and I'm as guilty as that as everybody else. So that's the whole collaborative nature of it. I think the fact that people aren't agreeing first off, but I think the key thing is consensus. You know, that actually we start to understand and learn, rather than it just being like, well, 4 say yes and 3 say no. You know, it's like, you know, I think the whole process should be about getting to consensus where actually we're all comfortable with that, and we've all learned something through the process of getting to that decision. I think that's probably the best part of it. You know, who doesn't like a bit of a debate, you know? So.
Debate's good. Sue, I can see you smiling on that one.
Yeah, no, well, this year I have to say, probably the first time it's happened, we didn't have huge debates about the winners. We came, you know, all of us came to sort of similar conclusions pretty early on, which is quite unusual actually for the South East. We normally have lots of different views, lots of different opinions about schemes, and some schemes or projects really divide the judges. And I think what we try and do is then work through what the key points that really we feel are very strong, and the other points where we feel perhaps there are differences of views and opinions, and look to see if we can either find any different evidence to help us conclude on that, or actually ask the people who've submitted, or when we've been on site and have a look at particular things. But in the end, it is around, you know, planning is around consensus. It's bringing lots of different opinions together and being very clear. And it goes back to the points we've made around, you know, criteria, because sometimes judges like to go off on their own whims of, you know, flights of fancy. And it's again rooting it back into these are the criteria that we're using. And we must make sure that we can justify any decisions that we make, and I think that's the key thing. Are we comfortable overall with the decisions that we make? And we do get there, even though sometimes it takes quite a lot of discussions, but this year it was pretty easy for us.
That's interesting, isn't it? The planning balance, which we're all well used to, coming out there. And Alyn, anything from your side?
Well, look, you get a small group of, well, half a dozen people, Yorkshire people in a room, you're going to get strong opinions. And going back what Sue was saying is that I'd say on 60% of the entries there is a very close correlation on individual views, scoring them against the criteria. The rest, there will be a divergence. And I mean, one of the joys of the judging process is actually going through and just discussing why people arrive at different conclusions. Applying the same criteria, and that's actually a really enjoyable part of the process. And for me, it was one element that the doing the judging remotely this year, where it wasn't quite as good as being in a room and like, let's have a break, let's have a coffee, let's get back, let's get back. But it's the discussion that leads to the conclusion at the end of the day, and nobody's ever fallen out over it. But it's just that process, I just think, is really good.
And that's really, really helpful. And Stephanie, anything from your side on that, from West Midlands experience?
I would say not much more to add. Our experience has been fairly similar in that, like you say, there are different opinions in the room, all with different perspectives about what is planning excellence and how you apply the criteria, and it does come down to that discussion, understanding how people have reached different conclusions, and then seeking to build a consensus around a winner that we can all support.
I must admit, I absolutely love that discussion part of judging. That to me, you know, you've been out, you've looked at something, you've got your own view. And it's when you start to hear the challenges of others or the views of others, and you say, I didn't think of that, or I didn't look at it in that way. And I just find it so interesting. But I agree with Sue, sometimes it's very easy to get there and just say, right, we're all agreed on this. Others, it's, and I know from talking to other judges, just how hard it's been this year because of the quality that's been there, and that makes it so difficult. Right, so on to the next question. I have to stare at the screen a little bit here again. Are there any barriers that you have found entrance fields stop them from entering? How can they overcome them? Now that's difficult because you only see what comes in. So this may be a result of conversations that, you know, you're aware of in the region. I think, Alyn, you sort of almost, if I can start with you, alluded to that a little bit in terms of the young planners entrance.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know why in Yorkshire people seem inhibited about entering. The other point I'd say is that we tend to see medium to large schemes as entries. What we don't tend to see, having said that, there are two schemes that we judged this year were exceptional. We don't seem to have small schemes, you know, and I'd like to see some small, really good, you know, detailed schemes that are really well fitted into places, but of a small scale. And I don't know whether people are inhibited because, you know, they think small scale schemes have no place in the awards. Well, of course they do, and that's the sort of thing I'd like to see, as well as more entries from young planners.
That's really interesting take on that, because yes, we do tend to see the large schemes, don't we? But is that the case in sort of the experience of the West Midlands very much? That's for Stephanie.
Yeah, I think it probably is. The majority of our entries this year were medium to large scale schemes. We did have some smaller scale examples, which ended up in our shortlist. So perhaps there is a bit of a barrier there, and we would encourage entries from smaller scale projects. And I would, again, it's a similar point around the young planners. We'd be very keen to increase the number of entrants that we get for the young planners category as well, and in the West Midlands. And I'm sure everybody would encourage young planners to go out there and put themselves forward and to celebrate their successes, but also giving them an opportunity to kind of reflect on what they've done and kind of what they aspire to do going forward. So it's just have the confidence in yourself, and if you want to run it past other people, that's a really good way of doing it, to make sure that you're not underselling yourself. You should really be putting yourself out there and going for it.
That's interesting. Perhaps we need a judge mentoring scheme so people can be mentored to put them in. Sue, any thoughts to add to what's been said?
Yeah, I mean, I agree very much with Alyn and Stephanie. I think by our very nature as planners, we're quite modest, and it's not necessarily our sort of training to, you know, to always be claiming the best. And I think sometimes we you know, do a scheme and then we move on to something else, and then that sort of reflection of actually how good it is doesn't always get celebrated enough. So I think there's some really good planning that never comes forward. And so I think that sometimes just our sort of, you know, professional culture sometimes doesn't necessarily sort of say, yeah, this is brilliant and I'm gonna put it forward. I think other things is a time issue. I think for some people they are really, really busy, they're time poor, and this is another thing to do, even though I would suggest that it's actually really, really straightforward to do this. So it's just making the time. And I think sometimes it's the idea of that sort of fear of failure. Well, if I do put it in and I don't get shortlisted, what does that say? Is that going to damage me, my professional reputation, my company, or whatever? So I think there's probably a variety of things. But I think whatever you do, if you put in, wherever you come, it's a fantastic learning experience, whether you win or not, and it helps you, you know, just hone and develop your skills. So I would really encourage people. There's never any failures. It's just, you know, you learn from it, and you know, that whole thing about being reflective and doing a submission really means you have to reflect on what it is that you've been doing, and I think that's just a winning tick box anyway.
Thank you. And finally, Tim.
Well, I mean, I think the big message really is all our runners are winners. You know, I mean, for us, you know, you have overall winners, but actually, you know, they are, you know, effectively shortlisted for a reason, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. I'm always slightly concerned that, I mean, having won a regional award myself for a policy document, you don't tend to see that sort of thing kind of coming forward, and there's no good reason why you kind of can't in some ways. And it's really good when you do get a submission from like a local authority that's just doing some really good, solid, hard mile, heavy lifting planning work to try and sort somewhere out, is a valid planning activity, you know. And we had one this year that was like that very thing. You know, you're taking a chunk of town that like nobody knows what to do with, you know, and it's been sat there for a while, you know, and you put in that framework together that starts to build that sort of level of certainty. So, you know, there is that whole tension between how early stage it is. But I think there's some really important planning work that goes on that actually does set the scene and turns the ground over in readiness for the next step. I think that's really valid stuff as well. So I think it's that diversity of what we do is the sort of thing we want to see reflected. So I'd encourage people to tell us through the awards what it is they're doing, and it then shows the diversity and spread of what planning's doing, because sometimes it does take a while for stuff to come out of the ground, but it's still, you know. But the thing is, a lot of stuff, if we hadn't planned for it 20 years ago, we wouldn't be having it now. And you know, as they say, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best is today. You know, but it's really important to kind of get those things in place early. So that's that. I'd say anyway, we've had a good one this year like that.
So the big message to everybody listening is, if you see good planning, wherever it is and whatever shape it is, whatever size it is, try and persuade whoever you've met who's shown you that to think about applying for the regional awards. And that way we can actually start to change things. So I'm now going to go on to the next question. Can you do a joint entry? How do you make one successfully, i.e. public and private sector combined? Now, I don't know, has anybody had a combined one this year that they'd like to kick off with?
It's in Yorkshire, it's not unusual to get entries from the private sector and the local authority that dealt with the scheme. I'm thinking of Leeds, Hull. Those are the ones that spring to mind. So it's not unusual for that to happen. And you know, from my perspective, there is no reason why you can't have that. You shouldn't have a joint entry. What's important is the scheme at the end of the day, and how the entry addresses the criteria. The identity of the entrant, you know, is really, as judges in our circle in Yorkshire, we're actually quite blind to that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And the one thing I would say that I would add is that if you look at the winner of the Silver Jubilee Cup for 2020, the Marmalade Lane scheme in Cambridge, that was a joint submission. So it really shows not only can you do it, but actually it can rise to the absolute top of the pile. And it is a tremendous scheme, it really is. I saw Stephanie nodding there. Don't know if you want to add anything on joint submissions.
I was just going to say it's a similar experience in the West Midlands. I think we had a number of submissions this year which had the names of local authorities and developers, private sector, on the submissions. And in those circumstances, they've apparently been prepared jointly, and that they really were able to show the effective partnership working and collaboration, and they were part of the reason why they were successful in being shortlisted. So yeah, certainly encourage joint entries, because it shows that collaboration, which is what planning's about, really.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go to Sue and Tim on this one, because I've noticed we've had one or two more questions come in quite quickly. So I'll go to you two next on the next question, which I'm going to read out. How is the RTPI planning to continue to show off these great submissions? Now, I'm going to take it on a regional basis, because obviously the winners will go into the national awards in one way or another. So if you can answer sort of from a regional perspective, how are you in your region going to sort of try and continue to promote and shape? And I know, Stephanie, you mentioned earlier the fact that one of the entries is going to go into a CPD programme. It's inspired you to look at CPD for next year on that, which is a fantastic way of rolling it forward. So if I can perhaps start with Tim and then go to Sue after that on that one.
I think that the challenges are greater at the moment. So, you know, normally you have a big bash and it has a resonance, you know, through the years. So you're not just the hangover the next day, but you do have that kind of, you know, it does have a resonance. And I think that is something we've got to try and keep just pumping out the message about the things that have been really good in our region. So that's like, to me, it seems like a regular updating of people about you know, to keep it in your memory until next year. And actually the upcoming awards, but whether it's national, whether it's our next round of regional ones, is actually a chance to basically get back out there and saying, look, last year these are the winners. These are examples of things that you would reasonably want to see. But also completely taking Stephanie's point, I think forming some CPD around it's a really cool idea, and I think that's a really good thing to go over that. And I think there's quite a lot of potential in that. And again, we've got quite flexible formats now. This sort of thing is great because actually you don't have room hire and you don't have this and you don't have that. You can put stuff on, really, can't you? So it's pretty good. It's good.
That's great. And Sue, is there anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the past actually, you know, we've celebrated, then moved on, and I think, you know, the value of the awards is the learning that we can all gain from the, you know, the winners and the shortlisted. So I think the points around using it as CPD, doing webcasts with people at the moment, getting the winners to come and talk about what it is that, you know, how it was for them, their learning points, the bits that actually were the challenges, how they overcome them. I think is immensely valuable for people, and we all like to hear about those details, and we all like to have that discussion as well. And I think it's just being able to share that more widely, more consistently, and looking at a CPD program, or using, you know, virtual platforms now in a different sort of way, is a great way to get this out, because I think there is a tendency for us all not to do the learning from these brilliant schemes and these brilliant projects or policies, and we could all do with that, because we can't really keep reinventing the wheel. So let's get it out there. And of course, there's no geographical boundaries now with virtual events. So I would really like to hear something about from the winners of the different regions, not just the southeast.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And to me, one of the big benefits of this virtual world has been where I've been able to do the presidential visits that would normally go in person to see these schemes, which I would have loved to have done, but going there virtually and being able to bring all the people together on those projects and to have it recorded in a webinar that then is open to everybody to actually see. And I know just how many people have been viewing these webinars that have been shown on YouTube. Absolutely fantastic. And it does exactly what you say. It opens it up to so many more people to share that experience. I can go on to the next question, and then I'll ask Alyn and Stephanie to lead on this if I can. Right, the next one actually repeats a bit. Does one criteria supersede them all, or are they all equal? A difficult one, that, isn't it? Planning balance comes straight to mind. Stephanie, I can see you're raring to go.
Thanks, Sue. I think we take the criteria as equal when we are assessing the submissions, but ultimately you kind of end up in that discussion, and you discuss the criteria in the round. So whilst we assess the submissions very much on every criteria is equal basis, there is that discussion and opportunity for applying a balance. So I would encourage entrants to make sure that they do put every effort into addressing every criteria as best as they can, but not to worry too much if they feel that they don't meet one criteria quite as well as the rest of the criteria.
And over to you, Alyn.
Yeah, I mean, we I don't know how other regions deal with it, but we score each scheme or each entrant 1 to 5 on each criteria. So effectively, each criteria is given the same weight. And there are some sorts of projects like neighbourhood plans that we've had to judge, which obviously score very highly on certain criteria, but less so on others, and other schemes do differently. But the criteria effectively allow us to, you know, make a judgment between an apple and a wingnut, because you're dealing with very different things, but they're being judged against the same criteria, and you're applying the same ranking, if you like. Well, they're not ranked, but the same score there to actually get to a score at the end of the day where you can say, right, there has been a playing field here that everybody's played on. Some people have played better in one part of it than another, but overall, the criteria are given equal weight.
That's really helpful. Now, we're almost coming up to time. So what I'd like to ask each of you judges, if I may, is if you wanted to leave people who've been listening to everything that we've said with one key takeaway message, the big thing that you'd like to leave them with, what would it be? And if I can perhaps start with Sue.
Oh, right. And okay, for me, it is around drawing out the quality of the professional skills and really profiling those and really making sure that everyone understands the unique role of the planner in delivering sustainable places, and allow that to come out and sing, and let's have a voice to that.
Thank you. And if I can go to Tim next.
Just plain and simple, have a go. You know, I think we shouldn't be hiding our light under the bushel. You know, so there's loads of good stuff happening out there, and I mean, the same in the north, Shybairn's getting out. You know, so you've got to have a go. You know, your hat's not in the ring, you're not going to win, are you? So have a go.
Well made.
Get one in.
Alyn.
Well, I was going. My point was going to be what Sue's said. She's put it far more eloquently than me. But my second point would be to basically say, you know, be brief and succinct. Focus on the main issues that relate to the criteria. It doesn't have to be long, and it makes life easy, and we can really see through and see what's making the scheme shine.
Brilliant. And final word to Stephanie.
It perhaps just builds on Tim's point actually, but it's about putting others forward as well. If we're not putting forward ourselves, so are there other young planners or other people's projects actually, which we think should be being put forward for these awards and being celebrated, and bearing those in mind and having those conversations, so that we do recognise the breadth of planning and people who are involved in planning across the country.
Well, thank you all for those. I think they're 4 really special sort of points to take away. So we've reached the end of our time, and I'd really like to thank all of the judges for what has been fascinating, insightful and inspiring. Thank you all very, very much. And for those listening, looking forward, if you were unable to enter the 2020 regional contest and you've been inspired by what you've heard today, then there's still plenty of time to enter the national awards. The closing date's the 14th of December. So take that opportunity to showcase your projects, public, private, combined, whatever they may be, your teams, your organisations, and get those entries in. And if you did miss any of the regional awards ceremonies, then as we've mentioned, you can catch up with them on the RTPI YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/the-RTPI. And in that way, you'll be notified of the RTPI's videos as soon as they come released. And that includes the videos that we do as part of presidential visits that include the regional award winners. So you'll be setting yourself up well for the future. Now, a recording of the session, as I mentioned at the start, will be going up soon. So if you're watching this, please leave us a comment down below, because we'd still like to hear your thoughts, and give us a thumbs up on the video. So once again, thank you all so much to our judges, to Alyn, to Tim, to Stephanie and to Sue. It's been a really inspiring session. Thank you.